Sweet. Oh, and Andy's here. Great. Okay, so good afternoon and welcome to the February 12th meeting of the Planning Commission. As we begin our meeting, we respectfully acknowledge that our meeting today is taking place on occupied Coast Salish land. We pay respect to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all Indigenous people. To acknowledge this land is to recognize the history of physical and cultural genocide and settler colonialism, which continues to displace Indigenous people today. It is also to recognize these lands, waters, and their significance for the resilient and wise peoples who continue to thrive in this region despite the consequences of displacement and broken treaties. Those who hold settler privilege in this city must work towards supporting the Coast Salish people and all Indigenous people using the various forms of wealth and privilege they reap due to it. So welcome, my name is Yo Alvarez. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Seattle Planning Commission with Matt Hutchins, who's also on the call today. We'll start with a couple of announcements to members of the public and visitors. First of all, welcome. We're happy to make all commission meetings open to the public. That said, please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings since the commission is an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders that in turn make the actual decisions, and we encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. This meeting is a hybrid meeting with some individuals participating remotely while others are participating in the boards and commissions room at Seattle City Hall. We'll start off with our color brave space norms. I'd like to invite a commissioner to choose and briefly speak to one of our color brave space norms that they feel has a particular relevance to today's agenda.
I'm happy to jump in here.
Thanks,
Matt. I would like to highlight, keep focused on our collective goal, create racial justice through Black liberation and Native sovereignty. I think that as we continue to work through now into the centers and corridors, those affect a lot of our neighborhoods that have traditionally been home to both Black and Indigenous folks, and seeing how we are, how the city is evolving and how that continues to shape or impact their lives.
Great. Thanks, Matt. If there's no amendments or modifications, I'll suggest that we all agree to these norms. Hearing none, we'll start with a round of introductions. I will kick us off. My name is Yo Alvarez. I use she, they pronouns. I live in Whit Center, Highland Park, and my day job is as a designer at Element Architects in downtown Seattle. I think maybe we'll go around the room first. Michaela, do you want to start?
Sure. Michaela Daffron, pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill. I work for King County doing regional affordable housing planning. And I use she, her pronouns. And Rebecca. Hi. Sorry, I know you're just still getting settled.
I know, sorry, I'm late. I'm trying really hard. My name is Rebecca Brilliant, she, her pronouns. I live in the Whittier Heights Crown Hill area, and my day job is working on transit-oriented development for Sound Transit.
Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Jaden Shields. I use she, her pronouns. I live in the Ballard neighborhood, and my day job, I'm the community planner focused on equitable and inclusive decision-making and urbanism.
Rose, do you want to start us off online?
Sure. I'm Rose Lucella Whitson, pronouns they, them. My day job is as a professional wetland scientist and permitting specialist with Jacobs Engineering, and I'm based up north in the Licton Springs Northgate transition zone. I will pass to Nick.
Hi, everyone. Nick Whipple. I use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle in the North Delridge neighborhood. For my day job, I'm a city planner on the east side. How about Caleb?
Hi, everyone. Caleb Twolday, he, him pronouns. I live in Beacon Hill, and I'm an educator at Rainier Scholars. And I'll pass it to Cecilia.
Hi, I'm Cecilia. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill, and for my day job, I'm a ADA and disability equity specialist at King County. And I will pass it to um, Dylan Glisecki.
Hey guys, Dylan Glisecki. I am an architect and urban designer at Perkins Eastman, working on mostly residential and urban infrastructure projects. I use he, him pronouns, and I live in the Central District. And let's see, Matt, have you gone yet?
I have not. Oh wait, unless there's Matt Stevenson here too. Anyway, okay. Matt Hutchins. I am an architect. I live in West Seattle. That's it. Let's see who am I missing now?
Margaret?
Margaret.
Great, thank you. I'm Margaret Zellis. I live in the Fremont area, and my day job, day school is I'm in law school studying land use and environmental law. And pass it off to Andy.
Yeah, hi, Andy Dannenberg, he, him, live in Northeast Seattle, and I teach at the University of Washington in public health and urban planning. Michaela, did you go yet? I'm not keeping track very well.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay. Who am I missing?
I'm gonna introduce Radhika Nair. She uses she, her pronouns. She's an urban planner. She lives in Wedgwood, and she is not able to talk because she's just coming fresh off a dental appointment. So thank you for that commitment, Radhika. And let's move to staff. Robin.
Robin McGonigal, I use she, they pronouns, and I am staff to the Planning Commission, and I live on Vashon Island. Olivia?
Yeah, hi everyone, Olivia Gager, she, her pronouns, and I'm also staff to the commission.
I am John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm staff to the Planning Commission.
I'll wrap this up. My name is Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the All Volunteer Planning Commission. So back to Zika.
Great. So we have a packed agenda today. The 3 items on the agenda are a briefing on the Centers and Corridors legislation by staff from the Office of Planning and Community Development, a briefing on the Manufacturing and Industrial Center plans by staff from OPCD, and Commission business, which will include a recap of our final comments on the draft downtown sub-area plan, as well as a significant number of public comments. We've shifted our approval of the January 22nd meeting minutes and addressing other business to the end of this meeting to accommodate the public comment, a portion of which we may need to shift to the end of that meeting. But Vanessa will have more on this.
Great. Yeah, thanks. As noted, this is a hybrid meeting. I would like to remind commissioners to use the chat function to be recognized to speak. Please do not use the chat function for substantive comment, as we have a number of people joining us, number of members of the public joining us, both here in person in the boards and commissions room, as well as on the phone, and they don't have access to the chat. So I'll move into public comment. There are 3 ways to provide public comment, either to email me and I will read it. I've received a number of comments that I will read. Either if you're joining on the MS Teams platform, please raise your hand. If you're joining via phone and you care to give public comment, please again email me. That email address is Vanessa Murdoch, VANESSA .Murdoch, MURDOCK @seattle.gov. Or you can provide public comment by joining us here in the boards and commissions room. So as Zio alluded to, we have a number of public comments that we've received already. So we only have 5 minutes on the agenda from 3:10 to 3:15 for public comment. So we're going to recognize those individuals who have joined us here and care to give public comment. Public comment is asked to be kept to 2 minutes. We will get through as much as we can in the 5 minutes, and then I will read public comment that was emailed to me at the end of the meeting, which will occur sometime around 4:45 or 4:50. So I'll just read the public comment. We provide time for public comment at all meetings. We don't tend to get as many members of the public commenting as we do today. So welcome everybody. Thank you for that. Just a reminder that we do not hold public hearings. We are an advisory body. We make recommendations to elected leaders who in turn make the actual decisions. Individuals who make comments to the commission should remember that the mayor and city council make the decisions, and we encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. So please keep your comments to 2 minutes, and I will start walking around the room and inviting people who have joined us. Scott Roberts, please join us at the table where the little white puck is, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Scott Roberts. I've lived on 39th Avenue Southwest in the Morgan Junction of West Seattle for 26 years. I support the One Seattle plan's goal of concentrating density in our commercial cores and transit corridors. However, I'm requesting a targeted correction for 39th Avenue Southwest, where the west side of the street is currently proposed for LR2 zoning. From a planning perspective, this block is a residential mid-block, not a corridor. LR2 creates a mismatch here for 3 reasons. Scale. LR2 heights are fundamentally out of scale with the street's topography and residential continuity. Tear down pressure. Rezoning this block triggers the displacement of older, naturally affordable homes, directly conflicting with the plan's anti-displacement goals. And capacity and infrastructure already exists along California and Fauntleroy. 39th should be kept as a residential buffer. I invite the commissioners to walk 39th Avenue from Morgan to Raymond. You'll see exactly what a 2D zoning map misses: a narrow, sloped residential interior that simply lacks the capacity for mid-scale development. I respectfully ask the commission to recommend maintaining neighborhood residential zoning for 39th Avenue Southwest in your formal letter to council. Thanks for the commitment to thoughtful, scale-appropriate planning.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Next up, we have Gary Lee. Welcome, Gary.
Shall I start?
Please do.
I'm Gary Lee, and I sent you an email last week. Did you pass it out to the commissioners?
We did.
Thank you. So I'm here just personally just to kind of recap what I said. The downtown plan, I think, is great. The vision is great. However, there's no policies that I saw that would evaluate any conflicting land uses that would fight against the vision. We've got some existing situations, obviously, that I believe are not going to be helpful to achieving that vision. So I think that there should be some policies to evaluate those and to amend the land use code to make them become non-conforming uses so they eventually go away through market forces. There was an existing policy in the downtown plan, or I guess the downtown plan is still in effect until the new one comes in. Anyways, it's called DT-HSP 5, and it said to not concentrate homeless services, human services in the downtown in any one particular area. That was a policy, is a policy. However, there was no implementing zoning regulations ever adopted. I don't even know if they were drafted. So there's no regulations that would help to regulate that. Thus, we have an over-concentration of human services downtown in the Pioneer Square and in the DID area. So with that, I'm urging you to not add any policies in downtown plan regarding the homeless or human services. City Council already did that, and I put that in my email. And so that's covered. But I would recommend and ask you to put it in the regional services, regional centers policies, because now there are more regional centers than there are little neighborhoods in the downtown. And I think that they could be fairly dispersed throughout those regional centers. And I think it would be good to add that type of policy there, not in the downtown, because people get confused when you put it in there. They say, oh, I think to focus it downtown. No, that's the issue that we have right now. So again, I think the visions are great. It's just the implementation policies that need to follow up to do that, to make sure there isn't any conflicting issues. And then what I'm trying to do is get you not to put any conflicting policies in there that would help, that would hinder the achievement of the vision. Let's see, anything else?
You're actually at time. Jerry.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We do have a member of the public joining us on the phone, Sabrina and Jenny. And Robin, can you unmute them, please? Or you may need to unmute yourself.
Robin can first make them a presenter and then they should be able to unmute themselves.
Okay. Did you catch that, Robin?
Yep, just did it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Sabrina and Jenny, or at least that's how your name is appearing.
If you're looking for your unmute button, it's a little microphone icon in the top right-hand corner of your screen.
We cannot hear you if you.
Okay,
there you
there.
go. Yeah.
Okay. Hello. My name is Sabrina Knowles, and my comment is very simple. I moved here with my partner 23 years ago from Capitol Hill because we wanted to live in a traditional Seattle neighborhood, which is what we did. We're creators over here, which means we're makers. We make things, and that's how we make our living. But my comment is basically we just love living in a traditional neighborhood. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Sabrina. Appreciate your comment. I'm just checking my email to see if any of the members of the public joining us online have asked to be recognized to speak, and I'm not seeing that. So we are at 3:17. I want to thank everybody who has provided public comment. And if you're interested, please do stay tuned. I will read. I've received 7 individual public comments that I will read at the end of the meeting, which, as I mentioned before, will be around 4:45 or 4:50, depending on how much on track we're able to stay. So with that, I will turn it over to Zio.
Great, thank you. So we'll start off with our briefing on the Centers and Corridors legislation. Brennan Stanley is here from the Office of Planning and Community Development to provide a briefing on the Centers and Corridors legislation under consideration at the Seattle City Council. The legislation is part of the implementing framework for the One Seattle plan passed in December. So welcome, Brennan, and we have 45 minutes for this agenda item. If you can just leave us 25 to 30 of those minutes for questions and comments.
That sounds great. Well, thanks for having me. Great. So obviously the context here is that the comprehensive plan is now adopted, and it obviously provided a growth strategy. It gave the kind of high level overview of how we want to grow. It has new place types with specific boundaries in it. And then for each of those place types, it talks about kind of the general vision, the types of zoning that are appropriate, et cetera. So we are now obviously in the process of implementing that vision that has to be done through zoning, the actual rules on the ground. The first phase of doing that was the neighborhood residential update, which is now effective. Obviously, that supports primarily the creation of new attached and detached homes, so essentially more ownership units primarily. And so this new piece of legislation we're here to talk about, the Centers and Corridors legislation, is meant to be a complement to that by creating new opportunities to add apartments and condos near transit, retail services, and public amenities. So the context for this is, as you're all aware, we're in the middle of a very serious housing crisis. From 2015 to 2025, the average price of a home basically doubled. Between 2011 and 2021, an average rent increased by about 75%. And now more than 20% of renters are paying more than half their income in rent. So obviously there's a lot of different components to this housing crisis. One of those components is that there's limited zoning. There's basically limited sites where you can build apartments and condos. Obviously, there's a lot of other pieces to it that we're working on it. But the purpose of this legislation is change the zoning so there are more sites in which you can locate apartments and condos in order to help to increase the supply of that. And I think it's really important to remember that increasing the supply and diversity of housing is critical for addressing a wide variety of issues that we have in the city. Obviously, it is incredibly important for supporting economic opportunity and mobility. Housing today is the biggest single cost that people have, and it's crowding out a lot of other things. We also know that it's one of the root causes of homelessness. When University of Washington professor looked at cities across the country, they found the only thing when you kind of do a regression that describes why there is more homeless in some cities is the high cost of housing. Obviously, it's also important for creating inclusive neighborhoods. Right now, large portions of cities do not have apartments and condos, and that means there are fewer opportunities for moderate and low-income people to live in those neighborhoods. Is also a critical part of addressing regional sprawl, and since it's important for businesses that have to pay a lot because all their employees can't afford housing as well. So we've been doing this work for a long time. We actually started the comp plan update in 2022. We went through 4 different phases of public engagement. 3 of those involved in-person and virtual open houses. The most recent one was in October of 2024, when we talked both about the neighborhood residential update and a draft proposal for centers and corridors. Included 7 open houses, online info sessions, virtual office hours, a wide variety of other things. And we did receive over 9,000 comments. At a high level, in terms of what we heard, generally there's a pretty broad agreement on the need for more housing, even if you don't agree on how to get there. Concerns about the proposal tended to focus on the scale of the buildings, the possibility in particular of 5-story buildings next to existing homes, localized factors like topography, historic districts, adequacy of transit services, the adequacy of existing infrastructure, and then impact on trees. Comments supporting the proposal tended to focus on the scale of the housing need and of the affordability crisis, the desire to address exclusivity of many neighborhoods, and then also a desire to increase housing choice, and especially real interest in stacked flats on quieter streets. I think it's really important just to also realize that there's some really big differences in kind of perspective and an opinion out there. I think that especially as we talk to people who own homes versus people who rent, they tend to see these issues in fundamentally different terms. And so it is important just to kind of recognize that there are a lot of people coming from a lot of different viewpoints in this work. So the centers and corridors legislation would implement rezones in 30 new neighborhood centers that were approved as part of the comprehensive plan, in 6 new and expanded urban centers, and along frequent transit corridors, generally those areas that have 15-minute headway during the day and 30-minute on weekends. It would also, though, modify development standards in low-rise and mid-rise zones to encourage more apartments and condos. So low-rise zones are 1, 2, and 3. These are our zones that are primarily multifamily from 3 to 5 stories. Mid-rise is multifamily between 6 and 8. But then the goal of those changes in development standards are, again, to make it easier to build apartments and condos in those zones. In terms of the rezone areas, you can see on the right the map that kind of shows them. In terms of the centers, the boundaries for those centers were set as part of the comp plan. That was the focus of those things. Whereas obviously we're not proposing to change any of them. We're now just talking about what is the appropriate zoning within those areas. The corridors, however, though, are not as defined in the comp plan. The comp plan says it's generally appropriate to locate higher density zoning, up to 5 stories on those transit routes, but it doesn't give a specific size or scale. this proposal has them being essentially a half block on either side of transit corridors. So within these areas, again, the comp plan gives a kind of a general overview. The zoning here really focuses on 5- and 6-story zones. And the reason for this is really where apartments and condos start to become feasible. We've had 4-story apartment zones for a long, long time, and we don't get very much apartment building there. In fact, in low rise 2, which is our 4-story zone, primary 4-story zone, over the last 5 years, we've only had 2 projects with 32 units in them. So 5 stories is really where apartments tend to become more feasible. Obviously, it's not hard and fast, but that's kind of generally. And so that's what we're focusing on. But there is some 4-story zoning at the edges or on slopes, to provide some of those transitions and recognize conditions. I'll just point out that on the other hand, most of what we're rezoning here is smaller lots, 5,000 square foot lots. And so at the same time, it's important to get to 5 or 6 stories to start making those projects feasible, but you're also not likely to see much zoning or buildings that are higher than that. It becomes very difficult to get to that 7, 8 stories without doing a lot of aggregation. And so in a sense, this is where the goal is sort of this kind of a sweet spot where apartments and condos might be feasible and practical. So we have an online map that gives a lot of detail on it. Just at a high level, important to note that all the areas that are being rezoned are shown in color. All the areas that are not are shown in gray. Areas that will be zoned in neighborhood commercial are shown in orange. Areas that would be low rise and mid rise are shown in brown. And then we also in bright pink outlines any area that has changed since our proposal in October 2024 is shown. So it's very easy to see the change in the proposal. If you want information on a specific site, you can click on it. It'll give more detail on the zoning, description. There's also a link to a summary that gives the development standards for those zones. And there are 2 to 3 pictures of recent development in that zone to get a sense of it. So I want to talk a little bit about how what we put out January compares to the proposal that one came out in October 2024. There are essentially 4 areas of change, and I have a slide on each of them, but at a high level, changes were made to reflect the new updated center boundaries. So obviously there were changes to center boundaries at council, places where the boundary was shrunk, generally those areas outside reverted to whatever exists today, unless they're also on a transit corridor, in which we applied the basic kind of approach we were on transit corridors throughout the city. There were also some areas where there were expansions, as well as one place where it's moved. And in those areas, we made a new proposal based on the same goals and principles that we used in the first one. The second area is incorporating local knowledge about specific circumstances that have come up. We also did some selective removals or height reductions along frequent transit routes when there were kind of larger corridor-based issues. And then we also tried to address split zone lots. The first on the center boundaries, the comp plan included a number of changes. There were some places where the expansion of urban centers was actually shrunk a little bit in those areas, urban centers that didn't have light rail or bus rapid transit. Essentially, looking at the initial proposal, the area of change was larger than basically of the urban centers that didn't have light rail and bus rapid transit in other areas. So it was made to be more consistent with those. Council made amendments in 10 urban centers and urban and neighborhood centers. And then Finney Ridge was also shifted to East Ballard. This is a picture on the side is an example of Madrona. And you can see, the areas that are now grayed out and that are outlined in pink. Those are areas that were removed from the center boundaries and will now retain their existing zoning, which in this case is neighborhood residential. The one thing of note is you'll note that on the west side, there is a little strip that was removed, but it's on a frequent transit corridor. So that same frequent transit corridor approach that we've been doing in other areas was continued to be applied there. The next set of areas where kind of local circumstances that were brought up, those were generally topography, environmentally critical areas. Important to note that generally environmentally critical areas were accounted for in the original one, but there were a small number of examples where they weren't, and that those were addressed. Places where there were undeveloped right-of-ways that actually made the access and et cetera very different. And then some isolated and irregular lot shapes. This is an example from Northeast Seattle where there's a whole bunch of things all happening at once. You can see in the blue is the extent of the riparian corridor surrounding Thornton Creek. They actually took up some portions of those sites. So that's one reason why those sites were removed. But then there's a bunch of other sites that when you actually look at existing right-of-ways and strange lot shapes, that a bunch of those sites became isolated. There was really no opportunity to aggregate them. They had strange relationships to adjacent parcels. And for that reason, in this case, again, those areas were removed entirely. That portion of the frequent transit corridor was removed. Important to note that it continues both to the north and the south. So it wasn't a large scale as these were not. Then there were some places where the frequent transit route was changed. For example, some places with steep streets. Madrona Drive is a good example of a very steep street. That's actually fairly difficult to get a lot of people to walk up and get to transit or shuttle services. And so a portion of that was removed. There were 2 frequent transit routes where the transit service actually has been decreased since we started this proposal, and they no longer meet the definition of frequent transit. Those are Southeast Magnolia and 10th Avenue East and kind of North Capitol Hill. And then there were 2 portions of frequent transit corridors that have historic boulevards, Queen Anne Boulevard and then Mount Baker Boulevard. This is an example of 10th Avenue West on the west slope of Queen Anne. You can see in green is the Queen Avenue Boulevard. And so we removed the 5 or so blocks that abutted that historic boulevard designation.
What was the second location?
Mount Baker Boulevard, near Mount Baker.
Thanks.
Lastly, we did a lot of work to rectify split zone lots. So split zoning is when a individually owned lot has multiple zoning designations on it. This can make it hard to develop, particularly when one of those is neighborhood commercial or multifamily and the other is neighborhood residential. So we tried to address that and remove it where possible or reduce the intensity of it where it's more difficult. Generally, those changes involve increasing the lower density portion of the lot, so it's consistent with the higher density portion, but that is not true across the board. There are some places in which there's a small sliver that was actually the higher intensity one that we actually reduced. There also are some large lots where it didn't make sense to have the entire lot be one zoning designation. The picture is an example of an area in South Beacon Hill. In yellow are 2 existing lots that were mostly zoned neighborhood commercial, but had some neighborhood residential designation. And so we rezoned them so that the entirety of both those lots would be neighborhood commercial. So again, and then just, when looking back at those 4, I think overall those changes are fairly modest. Most of the proposal is the same as it was previously. Obviously, on aggregate, it tended to be a reduction in intensity, although the split lots, rectifying that actually kind of increased capacity, whereas the other ones mostly decreased it. I also think it's really important to note that all of the changes were based on the ground circumstances, and so so that was really the goal here was that when we heard from the public, we felt that the basic goals and principles that we started out with were correct. We had a lot of new information. We had 9,000 comments. We reviewed each of them individually and considered them individually. And so, where those comments brought up on the ground conditions that suggested that a different approach would be more consistent with the kind of goals and principles we started with, we made changes. So in addition to those zoning changes, there are also a number of changes to the development standards that apply to all zones, not just in the 3-zone area, but across the city in those areas. There are a number of them. One is that we're proposing to implement a stacked flat bonus in low-rise 1 and low-rise 2 that is generally consistent with what the bonus that was added in neighborhood residential zones. So when council adopted the neighborhood residential update with the amendments that they made, you actually, or currently, you're allowed to do a larger stacked flat development in neighborhood residential than you're allowed to do in low-rise 1 or low-rise 2 zones. And so the neighborhood residential is very complicated. There's a lot of aspects to it. But in general, we're increasing the FAR and height in low-rise and 1, 2 zones so that you can do a stacked flat that is consistent with what you can do in neighborhood residential zones. We're not going beyond that, above that. Neighborhood residential also has some kind of unique things about accessible units that are not in this proposal. But again, the goal to be kind of generally consistent. The second thing is changes to height and floor in our low-rise 3 zones. Low-rise 3 zones are pretty unique today in that they have totally different, or they're very different standards inside of centers than outside of them. Inside of centers, they are you're allowed to go to 5 stories with an FAR of 2.3. Well, that's pretty low FAR, so most people stick to 4 stories in that capacity. But then outside of the centers, you're only allowed to go to 4 stories and an FAR 1.8. So essentially, it functions like an LR3 zone in centers, and it functions as an LR2 zone outside of centers. So our proposal is one to make it have consistent height and floor area across, no matter whether you're in centers, so that it would be 5 stories everywhere. We're also, though, proposing to increase the FAR in those areas from what is now 2.3 to 2.5. Historically, low-rise 3 has had a very low FAR given the height limit. It is the lowest FAR for floor, and in fact, even compared to neighborhood residential, it is lower FAR per floor. So by going from 2.3 to 2.5, you're essentially taking what would be allowed today in a neighborhood residential zone and allowing 1 more floor of the same size on top of it. So an important but small change that makes it more different than low-rise neighborhood residential, low-rise 1 and low-rise 2 zones. Additionally, we're proposing to create a new 6-story residential zone. We're calling mid-rise 1. Today, there's just a mid-rise zone that allows for kind of generally 7 stories. We're proposing to call that mid-rise 2 and create a new mid-rise 1 zone. Obviously, that's a paper change by creating a new zone, but we are also proposing to apply it, although in fairly limited areas, as part of this proposal. In some, especially urban centers like Greenwood, Queen Anne, but in some limited neighborhood centers, it will be applied mostly on blocks where the other half is already zoned or proposed to be zoned to 65 feet. However, it is important to note that, as we do work in the future, having this zone will make it easier to apply in other areas where it might be especially more appropriate. The other major change, which I have more information on the side, is about the massing standards in mid-rise zones, setbacks, building width, and building depth. And then there are also some minor changes to screening, largely to clarify existing rules, and to FAR measurement, which does not change the FAR measurement in low-rise and multifamily zones, but would make the FAR measurement in neighborhood commercial zones the same as multifamily zones. For those people who like the weeds, the small tweak is that in the multifamily zone, if you take your circulation and either kind of leave it open, so there's openings on the sides, then it doesn't count towards, it does count towards FAR. In neighborhood commercial zones, that's not the case, and we would count it in everywhere since it has that same massing, and there's lots of reasons to enclose those spaces for climate and efficiency. We want to be consistent. Mid-rise changes. So mid-rise zones currently have perhaps the most complex requirements of any zone in Seattle, including excluding maybe a downtown zone or two. It has the classic kind of front, rear, and side setbacks that most zones have. However, it also has an upper level front setback. It has an upper level side setback, which is truly unique in the city, as well as having maximum width and maximum depth requirements. The outcome here is that we looked at recent projects, and every single project has had to get design departures. They all went through it. They all got multiple design departures. They're being given consistently. And I think that's a kind of a clear indication that this is overly prescriptive. And yeah, it is not a reasonable way to design buildings. And obviously having this means you have to go through a lot of extra process. Often it can add, you have to go through a master use permit, can add, 6 to 9 months to a project. And we're giving exemptions every time anyway. So the proposal here is the front setback would be unchanged. The rear setback would be reduced from 15 feet without an alley or 10 feet with an alley to 10 feet without an alley and 0 feet if there is one. This is kind of consistent with neighborhood residential and low-rise zones generally. The side setback would be reduced from a 7 feet average, 5 feet minimum to 5 feet. That would make it generally consistent with low-rise zones, although neighborhood residential zones actually are even less restrictive. We would remove the upper level front and side setbacks. Side setbacks are not something we do. They're not generally things that neighbors like because they put balconies right over the yard. Front setbacks, I think, are kind of were in vogue at a period of time because they make the top floor look a little bit set back and different. But they also then, often result in wider bases to make skinnier tops. And we're also proposing to remove the maximum width and depth requirements as well, which are mostly redundant unless you have a very big lot. So that is, before I quit, I just want to talk briefly about future phases of work. So obviously, the centers and corridors legislation is now at council. They're going to create a select committee on the comprehensive plan that will hear it. That will be a committee of all 9 council members. That committee has not been made yet, so it has to be created, and then the legislation has to go to that committee. Once it's created, they will kind of at the same time create a schedule for hearing it. So at this point, there is no schedule of any kind for next steps. But obviously, with all legislation, the council will have a public hearing. They will debate it. They will identify amendments. They will discuss those amendments before voting on it as well. So all that process is still to be determined in terms of timing. It is important to note, though, that this is not the end of updating our zoning, that we are working on what we're calling a phase 3. That phase 3 would revisit. So whereas phase 2 looks at the zoning in these new growth centers that were created as part of the comprehensive plan, the new neighborhood centers, the expansions of urban centers, and the new transit corridors. Phase 3 will involve kind of looking back at the existing places, the places that we had prior to the comp plan update. So it will include looking at a selection of urban centers. It'll also include revisiting the 3 regional centers for which there is planning work going on right now. So those are downtown, Northgate, and Capitol Hill, First Hill. It will also involve looking at the new and expanded neighborhood centers that council has asked us to look at in their companion resolution. So that's that kind of phase 3. After that, there will be additional work, which we have not scoped. So what's in it, what its timeline is all to be determined. But we do obviously have 4 more regional centers that we need time for those processes to the engagement process that we're starting to play out. We also have new station areas coming on as part of Sound Transit, and will be station planning that will go on that has to kind of play out before that's ready. And then we also have to comply with the new state TOD bill 1491, which will require us to look at places that we haven't already looked at that have light rail centers or bus rapid transit stops. So all of that is kind of a to be determined, no particular scope or timing for that. And then so lastly, we have two websites. We have zoning.oneseattleplan.com, where you can obviously get materials, and that's where the zoning maps are. And then the One Seattle Plan website, which has a lot more background on the One Seattle Plan. That's my presentation. Turn over to you guys.
Thank you. Matt, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Hey, Brennan, how are you doing?
Good.
All right. Let's see. I want to jump right into the weeds with regards to the development standards with the changes to NR zoning and the fact that they are not subject, NR is not subject to MHA. Currently, LR1 and LR2 are obsolete. There's going to continue to be zero development in those two zones because they essentially are slightly, but they're currently, you can build less there than in neighboring NR, and they're subject to MHA, so there's extra additional cost. I would love to see the city just roll in the same way that we rolled all the NR zones into just one, roll all the LR zones into just one, and simplify the code. In the same way, I would prefer not to create a new MR zone, but to also unify the heights. We just have this like complexity that just like grows and grows every time we take a look at the development code. And so reducing the number of zones, reducing the number of variants is going to make development a lot more straightforward and less risky. And then I would also recommend that if we are going to look at the development standards in low rise, the brass ring really is we need to have low rise buildings that have zero side yard setbacks. If we want to do something that from an urban design standpoint really creates a strong street edge and creates interior courtyards, we need the extra width rather than the extra depth. And so if we're going to be building high FAR buildings, and we're going to continue to dedicate 5 feet to each side yard, we're going to be getting buildings that are deeper and deeper and units that have less light, less access to air, fewer backyards, fewer courtyards. So I think we need to rip the Band-Aid off with regards to the development standards, simplify them, and really look at the urban design so that we kind of can achieve these perimeter blocks that have central interior courtyards, as opposed to the sort of linear front to back units where no one is everyone's facing their neighbor 10 feet away to the sides as opposed to front and back. Thanks.
Thank you. And I should just, because I meant to add a slide on MHA, I should just briefly point out to the group that so where we are rezoning things from neighborhood residential to other zones, we are applying MHA. So basically any rezone to any low-rise zone would have an M suffix, which is kind of baseline. Places where we are going beyond low-rise, we are proposing higher MHA requirements. So there's an M suffix is the kind of the lowest, M1 is the next, there's M2. So good for all the changes here, anything that's going to low rise would be M, something that's going to something more intense than that, or is coming from an existing low rise with M, a suffix, to something else, could have an M1 or an M2.
And without increasing the FAR, making these more palatable with zero side yard setbacks, that M suffix is essentially a stamp that says we can't, this building, this lot will not pencil. So the extra $20 or $30 a square foot that we charge for MHA, like all these upzones are yeah, they effectively, there's a donut shaped vacuum or a vacuum that is these LR zones until there's actually a bonus. It can't be the same as NR with MHA as a penalty. It's just not going to get developed.
All right. Thanks, Matt and Brennan. Michaela?
Process wise, does it make sense for us to tell you feedback on what's been transmitted? I continue to be, frustrated that we're not like consulted in these phases of the work before the work goes forward. And when you come back and give reports, you're just giving us sort of the generic briefing. But we've been really engaged in this process. We've provided a lot of really specific feedback. And by and large, the vision that we were trying to encourage the mayor and council to adopt didn't happen. And so I know that's not your fault. And your staff, you work at the pleasure of the mayor, and the council makes the final decision on the comprehensive plan. But like, what is your goal for this engagement with us today? And how can what's our role here in this process at this point?
Yeah, well, so obviously just procedurally, the legislation as a council, I couldn't change if I wanted to.
Yeah.
We obviously talk with council, we help them with kind of issue identification and things of that nature. So, it's always being knowledgeable about the issues that are out there is helpful, but honestly, you don't get much traction through me, just maybe as a, so council is the one that really needs to hear from people at this point. And obviously, it is worth noting that this is a piece of legislation that was developed under the previous administration. And so, but I think the other thing that's really important is that there's a lot more opportunities to consider this in future phases as well. Things like corridors. The purpose of that the kind of the unscoped work is looking kind of at transit areas, and so corridors could be in theory part of that work as well.
Okay.
But again, no scoping. So now council, there will also be more conversations in future phases as well.
So yeah, I'm just like a little confused as to why the new mayor did put like a pause on this and say like, hey, wait a minute, what is it that I want to transmit over there? And so does it make sense for us as a commission if we still want to lean in on tweaking and really rethinking some of these corridor proposals to suggest that happen in a later phase, or to suggest that happen in this phase?
Yeah, well, obviously I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I will say that, I think we gave a recommendation that it was good to move this forward quickly for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One is that there's a lot of work that we want to do, and delaying this portion will necessarily delay the next portions. And so I think it's important to get the first parts of it moving to council so they can start to make changes. I think the changes in the neighborhood center are a big important step. And so we want to make sure that happens. We want to make sure that happens this year. I think secondarily, obviously the comp plan is now adopted, and so the longer we wait, the more we're out of compliance with our comp plan, and things can happen.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, the other thing is that there are, SEPA implications. There are, we studied certain things in the plan, and so, without getting into the details of how SEPA works and everything, there are going to be more opportunities to kind of consider studying broader things as part of future SEPA work.
That's when folks have talked in the past about the supplemental EIS, you mean the supplemental EIS will inform future work in different phases.
Yeah, and to be clear, we are starting work on a supplemental EIS for what we call is phase 3, which again is the select urban centers, the 3 first package of first regional centers, and then councils, new and expanded centers. So that we'll study that. We are also aware there will be need for more environmental study for future things as well, though. So there will be more opportunities to study things as well.
Because I think some of what you talked about as a commission is, on the corridors in particular, is more than a half a block off of the arterials, or at least a more thoughtful consideration around which arterials deserve additional kind of thought and treatment around the health and livability impacts for the renters largely who are going to be living in those buildings. Should have a choice in where they live, and doubling down on density along like a half block off of major arterials doesn't really give folks that choice. Their only option if they want to have a transit-oriented lifestyle is to live right on top of the arterial, and I don't live on an arterial because they're not wonderful places to live. And so I really would like to have some time and space to have a really thoughtful regional conversation around TOD 2.0. Like, what does this look like? What does develop along our corridors if it is not multifamily housing? How deep into the blocks around transit stops should we be going? And it's going to make everybody uncomfortable, but I don't think that we should be embracing sort of the health and wellness of our people and our communities. So that's just something that I'm really hoping to revisit and want to hopefully bring some like academic research and public health on board to really think through how to do that in a better way. And then I'm surprised Matt said that. I mean, I'm not surprised Matt said the courtyard thing, but I was also going to bring the courtyard thing up. I know I talked about it at an open house event. And you know, even with townhomes and stuff, I can't connect with I live in a townhome, I own my house, and I can't connect with my neighbors because we do not have any shared space within that little parcel for us to get to know each other. And side yard setbacks from like alleyways and off of like adjacent parcels doesn't necessarily help connect anybody to anyone. It just helps keep us all separate and private. And within these parcels that are getting developed, how is it that we create connections with those folks that are living in those buildings, as well as a better relationship to the street edge, so that there's a sense of community, and folks who are walking and passing by can also benefit from the way the parcels are developed. So excited about that. And then I don't necessarily agree that all of the, okay, let me zoom out. We should be centering not in this a narrative of how we accommodated everybody's concerns around growth, but how are we accommodating and aligning with the vision set forward by the Growth Management Act, Vision 2050, the countywide planning policies, which set a very different vision. In particular, the countywide planning policies set this vision for a more equitable way of addressing folks' housing needs. And the narrative in these final phases has been about, you know, individual concerns. And like, I'm not sure I understand what the decision-making framework was in Madrona, if it wasn't just neighborhoods not wanting their neighborhood to change. We went and walked that community as a planning commission. It has 2 parks, it has a library, it has frequent transit service on a trolley line. It has schools. Like, these are the places where more people should be able to afford to live, to rent, to buy condos, and to enjoy those amenities. And so, so where you all as the OPCD made some decisions on the zoning maps, you should own that as like local conditions, but you shouldn't own all of the changes that happened, because those weren't all conditions that were, I would probably agree, were really substantial, necessary reductions in the footprint. So.
Yeah, thank you. I think, and that's a good point, that there were different sets of decision makers on that. They're like, I think Madrona is a great example of it, that the mayor actually, the previous mayor did actually amend it a little bit for a couple of blocks that were very steep. But then council amended it for a much broader area. And that, it was not our proposal, obviously, that was but then we came back, and not in the center itself, but rather on a frequent transit corridor that is farther from that commercial and is on a very steep street where it's, you know, people don't like to, you know, walk up that street to try and get to that center. So it's really not a great place for growth in the same way that something in the heart of Madrona might be. So that there are kind of 3 phases even in that little area of changes, and for very different reasons.
Michael Hubner, would you like to weigh in?
I'll be super quick, because I know there are other commissioners that want to speak. Apologies for being late. Michael Hubner, Long Range Planning Manager, and headed up the comp plan effort. I originally raised my hand. I just wanted to speak to where Michaela Daphne started and then ended. Thank you for all your thoughtful comments. Obviously, why are we here today? Sometimes we come to commission because we want to give you the information that you might need and find useful in providing comment to council. That's obviously where we're at in this particular process. Looking forward on all of the issues that you just ticked off, I think very articulately, we look forward to working with the commission and making space for conversations. And there is room in the process going forward to talk about a broader set of issues and changes around TOD, as you put it. We welcome that, and we'll work with your staff to find good times to come back to the commission and talk about further phases of zoning change or amendments to the comp plan that are coming out of your creative ideas. So just wanted to say, we hear you, and we'll try to make space for that.
Thanks, Michael.
Dylan?
Thanks, Bern, for the presentation. And I guess in terms of, we have a couple minutes left. We're not making comments to you guys, we're making comments to council. So in light of that, can you help me understand? I'm with Matt on this LR1, LR2, LR3. LR3 is the only one that's available right now. I'm going to just focus on that. So understanding LR1, LR2, can you just break down the thought process behind including it at the moment so we can provide a thoughtful comment to council with our concerns about LR1, LR2?
Gotcha. And sorry, just to be clear, you're asking about the rationale for including MHA in those.
The rationale just for including LR1, LR2.
Oh, gotcha.
In the plan.
Gotcha. So to be clear, there's no LR1 zoning in our proposal. For the reason you're saying it's not that much different than neighborhood residential, so we're not proposing it anywhere. The vast majority of LR3 is kind of the workhorse. That's the vast majority of our change is LR3. You have 5 stories. And then low-rise 4 is only in like very limited areas to provide places where there's topography or kind of a transition like we wanted.
Low-rise 2.
Yeah.
Just transition.
Yeah.
So low-rise 2 is introduced when there's like a transition to like an NR zone or where it's a steep slope. That's the idea.
Yeah, there's no kind of like formula, like it's always in this case. But it is primarily, so yes, it's really only at the peripheries, places where there are already transitions from neighborhood residential to something more intense. And it tends to be mostly in those areas where there's also a topography transition as well. But I think if you look around, you'll see that like there's often, I think, a little bit of low rise in most zones, but not very much. There's most neighborhood centers. And on frequent transit routes, really only where there is significant topography.
I know the 2 sites have developed. Can you restate that statistic again?
Yeah, over the last 5 years, which I guess would be at this point maybe a year out of date, but over a 5-year period, starting like 2021, we only had 2 apartment projects in low-rise 2 zones, and for a total of 32 units.
Right. So when we look at this map, when we see anything that is not low-rise 3, it's basically not developable right now. It's not going to be touched. And who knows what the future will bring. But right now, it's an area that's not.
Well, it would tend to be developed as townhouses rather than stack flats. Yeah. I think Matt has pointed out there are some issues when you look at like an low-rise 2 zone compared to neighborhood residential, that for stack flats, they don't look that, but for anything, they don't look that much different. But low-rise 2 has a mandatory housing affordability. So there is a kind of a disincentive.
Sure.
But if you have a very valuable site, then, that makes a lot of sense for townhouses. And again, people are developing apartments, just not many of them. So you might see some of that, and
not to the intended capacity.
Yes, probably.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, and I'll just point out though that there are a lot of things we are doing in the city to try and change those. The reasons for making it's difficult to build apartments is a long list of things. Many of those things that are changing right now at both at the city and the state level. People are looking differently at elevators, at condo liability. We're obviously making changes to the development standards to make it more feasible. There's a lot of work on sprinklers and other things like that to try and make the process easier. SEPA reform, design review reform. So it's also really important to note that this is a 20-year plan. The zoning is going to be there for the long haul. And so even if 3 years ago we weren't getting apartments, that isn't to say that 10 years out that won't be the predominant form in those areas. So there are reasons to have low-rise 2 zoning, even if maybe next year we don't expect that's going to have lots of apartments.
Got it. Appreciate that clarification.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, we should wrap this segment and move on to our next briefing, but always
Thanks for
appreciate,
staying. Thank you.
Our next briefing is with Jim Holmes from the Office of Planning and Community Development. He's joining us to provide a brief on manufacturing and industrial center plans. These plans will implement the maritime and industrial strategy, the development and refinement of which the Planning Commission followed closely and heartily supported. So welcome, Jim, and we have 45 minutes for this agenda item again, leaving 25 to 30 for conversation.
I'm not having logged in yet.
Oh.
A second here.
I almost don't want to do it. I'm sorry. I know.
We need it.
Is there a link to the meeting?
Let me send you.
We have one in our calendar invite, but I don't know that.
You have one in your calendar invite, Jim, but
I have I don't have one with a link. It's just a whole.
Oh. I just sent the link to your
Okay.
email.
Awesome. So I'm here to talk about MIC plans. And this is a preview, so you will have opportunities if you want to offer comments. Not coming through.
The link or the
link.
We've been having some connectivity challenges in this room.
Yeah, did it drop your internet access?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you have internet access?
If it becomes too much of an issue, we can probably just plug you into the
Oh, yeah.
screen.
Oh, okay.
So it can give another minute, but if not, we can do the HDMI cable and it should show.
Technology is not always our friend. Never mind.
Yeah, it's not here. Maybe we should just plug in. I can understand. Right?
Thanks, Olivia.
Yeah, thank you.
I have to switch which window it's sharing. So I guess it's sharing, right?
Okay, there. What do you mean?
It honestly, it changes fine. Sorry, folks. Worked last time. Not sure why it's
Hmm.
not working today. We had it for a second there.
Yeah.
We had something. It's not recognizing now.
Did he sit next to you when you advance the slides for him? Or-
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you just have email
Yeah,
slides
email
to me and I'll
slides,
share.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry.
Problem.
Fun
I'm
stuff
sure
later.
it's me.
Sure. While we're getting that set up, we're gonna just approve our January 22nd, 2026 minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes in the room?
Motions.
Julia motions.
Second, Michaela.
Michaela seconds. Are there any changes or amendments to the meeting minutes? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And any abstentions? Sweet. Those are approved. Should I just roll into the chair's report? Sweet. Okay. Upcoming commission meetings. Our next land use and transportation committee meeting is scheduled for next Thursday, February 19th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. online via the Teams platform. You should have an email from Robin about that. And our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, February 26th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. And that will be a hybrid meeting. That's probably enough for this.
I will.
Yeah.
I would like to, I was going to mention this at the end of the meeting, but while we are transitioning to our next agenda item, I would like to acknowledge the fact that today's the last meeting for Julia, Jen, and Shields. Boo, indeed. She had a short tenure on the commission, but we really appreciated her and will continue to appreciate her. Julia has accepted a fantastic position at SDOT, so I'm sure we will be seeing her in the future. And I don't know if you want to give a blurb about about the position.
Sure. Yeah, sad, very short commission run. But yeah, SDOT with their Seattle Transportation Plan in conjunction with the comp plan, the past handful of years identified a need in their work and public engagement. There's a gap where they're doing a great job on the ground when projects are happening, but there's not necessarily the tie between community priorities into the start of plans and projects to inform them and policies and how we move about public spaces. So they did an audit and community asked for that gap to be filled. Staff came together on different subcommittees and identified a need for a new program. Right now, they're going to call it the Geo Teams program, and it's going to be a group of geographically based staff that will form deep relationships in parts of the city, and then take the priorities and relationships built within that area and I guess, give them back, share them back in. And my role as supervisor will help them develop those relationships, have more culturally responsive strategies, and then work across the department and our partners like OPCD to make sure that all of our work is community driven and equitable. So really excited, very similar to the work I was fortunate to lead at King County the past 4 years. So looking forward to doing it here, and I am sad I won't be able to be on the commission anymore, but because the work is community focused, I'm sure I will be presenting and we'll be here again.
And we look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's some developing good news.
I do finally have your slides, so if you're not able to join, I can show. Took a while to come through via email, so let me know.
Probably just the Wi-Fi is slow, and so
Yeah.
receiving and sending is slow. But it looks like we got. Yay!
Okay,
Yay!
there we go. All right, Jim Holmes, Office of Planning Community Development. I'm here to talk about the manufacturing industrial center sub-area plans. I know you guys have been briefed on the regional center plans that are in development. This is the other two, the manufacturing industrial center plans, similarly required by PSRC. So yeah, required for both mix, provide once they are approved and the mix are recertified by PSRC, then they will have continued eligibility for federal transportation funding. PSC has some fairly specific guidance from Vision 2050 that should shape these plans. So each plan for PSRC has a vision statement, a land use chapter, transportation chapter, economic development chapter, environment and open space chapter, and the public services chapter. PSRC requires a lot of exhaustive descriptive information in each chapter. Fortunately, we underwent this great big industrial land use process called the Industrial Maritime Strategy. We have many reports and sources of information for that. Within the plan, you're going to see in each section background information. Then you're going to see goals followed by policies. And when this is approved by council, it is amended into the One Seattle Comprehensive Plan. So the policy goals and policies in these plans carry the same weight as other comprehensive plan goals and policies. But I do want to emphasize that this is, unlike maybe some of the other regional center plans, we are not really breaking new policy ground with these plans. We underwent a long industrial maritime strategy process. We've been implementing it in steps. This can be thought of as one of the final implementations of actions of that. It's really rooted in the stakeholder recommendations from that process. We have a number of strategies that come to life in these plans. We use the market study from that process, the land use analysis, and the EIS to support development of these plans. Because some of you weren't involved or weren't on the commission during the industrial maritime strategy process, and also because it's been a while, a few slides to kind of bring that back before we talk about the plans. So over the years, and it says 2016 to 2017, it goes back further. There were many failed attempts to modernize the city's industrial strategy. This one was convened in 2019. It had a fairly strong interdepartmental team made up of other city departments, stakeholder committee to guide the works of 60 representatives, and they really were a broad cross-section. They were property owners, business owners, developers, transportation advocates, housing advocates, residents of South Park and Georgetown. We really, in other agencies, we really tried to get everybody's voice into the process because there were a lot of thorny issues, housing in industrial areas, how are we going to handle sound transit stations, what is the future of industry, what should we be thinking about to make sure that we can meet emerging industrial trends, keep our industrial lands viable, and finally, really important, have equitable access to industrial jobs. The reason we do this work, industrial activity, is it does provide good living wage, career ladder jobs without traditional four-year college education. And they really provide access for a lot of people. They keep Seattle's economy stable in downturns. They just are a very important piece of Seattle's economic and planning puzzle. In 2021, stakeholders came out with a set of 11 strategy recommendations, and we started implementing this in 2022. And the budget had some funding for Office of Sustainability and Environment for some of their initiatives in that area, as well as some additional money for workforce development programs related to the maritime industry. In 2023, it was our biggest move. We rewrote the industrial zoning code, adopted that, amended the comprehensive plan with new industrial land use policies. And MIC plans, manufacturing industrial center plans this year are the next step. And I do want to go back on the comprehensive plan policies that were adopted in 2023. Those were the One Seattle plan update did not touch those. The industrial maritime strategy work was considered recent enough and thorough enough, and everybody wanted to see them just stay. So we did not touch those in the One Seattle plan update. So for all intents and purposes, this effort was the 10-year update for industrial land policies. So I talked about the development consensus strategies that are fleshed out by the policies and the MIC plans, include workforce investments, public safety partnerships, transportation investments, environmental initiatives, some land use strategies, stronger protections for industrial activity, looking at dense industrial development around sound transit stations, healthier transition areas from industrial areas to non-industrial areas, particularly in areas around South Park and Georgetown. No new residential uses, except for a few that we don't need to talk about today. We've talked about before. There were some specific planning goals in the Georgetown and South Park neighborhood that we addressed with this effort, and we took out some parts of the manufacturing industrial center boundaries. Actually, we changed them to accommodate some community goals within these non-industrial areas. The last two is the Wasca site and the Inner Bay Armory site and state-owned parcels. They're going to be redeveloped, and we kind of put a marker down. Anything that happens needs to happen with a master planning process between us and the state for industrial redevelopment of those. So in these plans, we kind of flesh out what that means. And then the last one was the stewardship entity. That's really not in our plans. That's existing. That's a really great thing. All right. So I talked about land use protections for core industrial areas. So we developed a new core industrial zone, which is really intended to be where all kinds of industry happens. And we tightened the timing of when you could. One of the problems we were facing was a lack of predictability in land use patterns to industrial users. And so we have new comprehensive plan policies that limit when land use can change to essentially major updates or after a major city-led study. We put in our zoning for what we call industrial transit-oriented development. That means it's industrial at the ground floor, and you can above it, you can have dense employment. You can't have residential uses, but it was a pre-COVID concept in that there was a roaring commercial office market at the time when this was developed. There will be, again, this plan will age and grow up, and you will see that the zones work pretty well. New capacity for 3,000 units of housing, and that was done by taking some areas outside of removing them from manufacturing industrial center boundaries or changing the zoning from industrial to non-industrial. There was a provision for workforce housing in one of the zones. And so far, we've not seen any applications for people wanting to take advantage of that. And finally, improve livability and environmental justice in edge neighborhoods. So that is the policy guts of what we tried to capture in the plan. So that's why I kind of went through that background. So, like I said, each element, there's going to be background information. We have a discussion of key challenges and opportunities in each MIC. I probably should say there's two MICs, the Greater Duwamish Manufacturing Industrial Center and the Ballard Inner Bay North End Manufacturing Industrial Center, shorthand BID MIC. And then after the key challenges and opportunities, they really set the context for the goals and policies that follow. So I actually want to go back. So I think it's also important to know that there are a lot of existing policies. There's existing programs in regulations that advance a lot of the goals we have for industrial activity, that accomplish a lot of the things PSRC wants us to try to address from a policy point of view, that already exist. So when we go through these, we'll talk about a goal, and then there's going to be a paragraph. Here is the existing programs and policies that affect it, that advance that goal. One of the unique things is because we have two mix. We have citywide policies where a city that has just one MIC, it's easy to say in the MIC, this is what it's going to be. So we're trying to draw that line that this is, the plans are very similar. And anybody who reads them see that we really think of the mix as a one whole, but there are some slight differences. So we talked about those citywide policies that advance the goals as if they're part of the big plan. Can't all that. Now we get into, so in the land use chapter, so some of the key opportunities and challenges in both plans that can be very similar. There are some differences, but protect irreplaceable water dependent uses. What are we going to, what's going to happen around the Dravis Light Rail Station? What's going to happen around the Ballard Light Rail Station? Limiting residential encroachment, resulting in all kinds of land use conflicts. As I said, what happens in the Inner Bay Armory when it is finally redeveloped. Greater Duwamish similarly has sound transit light stations that need to be taken into account. Also has some issues with residential encroachment. Reconnect South Park. Have you guys received a briefing on that? Yeah, that shows up in a couple places. That shows up both in the land use section, but also shows up in the transportation section. And the land use section is awesome because there's a potential to create 34 new acres of industrial land that doesn't exist, which I wasn't aware of until I started getting into this. And then, of course, Seattle's container port is really the heart of the Duwamish MIC. It's really drives so much of the activity. So the goals for both MICs, that in 20 years, that there will be a strong presence of industrial activity, that will be advanced through predictable land use policies, that there will be a transportation system that supports and is compatible with industrial activity, and that we have healthy transitions between industrial and non-industrial areas. Transportation element, once again, for both MICs, maintaining the freight network, continuing to invest in it, keeping it working, integrating the sound transit stations. On BINMIC, real focus on the 15th Avenue West corridor, including the Ballard Bridge and what happens to that in the future. Duwamish MIC, Reconnect South Park comes back as a transportation issue because, we need to, it offers some policy guidance, regardless of what options chosen. Be sure to include an understanding in your decision making, understand the impacts on freight movement through the area. Both of them promote a safe, active transportation network, and freight and bus lanes. Both of them use of freight and bus lanes are key arterials. The goals. Once again, address freight network constraints. There were some constraints identified in the EIS in both MICs, and we talked about those. High efficiency, improve the efficient use of the limited rights of way that both MICs have. We're not creating new ones. Strong intermodal connections need to be part of a successful functioning of a successful MIC. An active transportation network that safely coexists with the freight network. But I didn't put on here, and I should have. There's also both MIC plans will have MIC specific transportation project policy list that will be used to guide investments going forward in the mix. The economy chapter. So, opportunities and challenges about a little different in both of them. The BIDMIC, the brewery district, is a great thing that decision makers and stakeholders alike have expressed that they would like us to continue to support and help expand. The Inner Bay Armory, so I talk about master plan development. It kind of lays out what that's gonna look like, what type of green infrastructure is gonna be there, what kind of training programs are gonna be there. What kind of uses are gonna be there. So it kind of sets out the criteria where the land use element of the comprehensive plan is a little more vague. It says you're gonna do a master planning process. We're trying to fill in the lines here. Opportunities and challenges, light rail, obviously the Ballard Station and the Draven Station and the Smith Cove Station. Climate change affects both mix. Maritime innovation, and this that has to do with electrification for the most part, what's happening in the port. Uwamashmick, light rail, encroaching land uses as a challenge. Maritime innovation again, I mean, because of in the container port. So goals, economic development goals for the both mix is in 20 years, there'll be a strong presence of industrial maritime sectors and the living wage jobs they provide, that there will be equitable access to those jobs. That these areas will be home to subsectors, emerging subsectors of the industrial maritime economy, and that there'll be a blend of ICT and traditional industrial maritime employers near high capacity transit. ICT is information and computer technology, and that is kind of one of the emerging uses where you have companies that are actually fabricating drones or whatever, but they're also designing them, and there's a lot of high-tech work that goes on in the same building rather than separating them out. So that's what we're talking about when we say that. Environment and open space. Goals for both mix. Second, let's start with opportunities and challenges. In BINMIC, as with Benedict, contamination and fill. These areas were built on, over the century. There's all kinds of stuff there that we need to constantly remediate. The BINMIC and Array Armory, it's a challenge. I mean, it's not the cleanest place. It's adjacent to a pretty active rail system. So what happens there, we need to think about the quality of the environment there too. Combined sewer overflow, that's a great opportunity to improve water quality in Salmon Bay, and it's done, but we wanted to represent that as a key opportunity. Sea level rise, mainly on the T91 side of the BIDMIC, not so much at the Salmon Bay side. Once again, bike trail connectivity, build more connections to a network that's there, but in pieces. And I'm not saying anything about the missing link in that when I say that. Greater Duwamish environmental justice. We actually have, two communities that are actually living close to some pretty heavy industry. There's residents that live near industry in Ballard, but it's not the same kind of heavy industry. That's why we call that out for the Duwamish. Water quality in the Duwamish River. Obviously, it's been an ongoing problem. And there's a Superfund site, and continue to be something the city and other agencies are working on. Sea level rise is a big issue, particularly near South Park, not just the residential area, but the industrial area too. And so we talked about that a bit, and the bike trail connectivity. The goals, environmental goals include 20 years that we rehabilitate environmentally critical areas, that all new development will be characterized by innovative storm management practices, that there's a high quality network of open spaces and trails, that we will avoid environmental impacts on vulnerable populations, that there'll be a reduction in greenhouse gases generated from MIC activity, and that it'll be a workshop for innovative green building practices for some of the buildings that are built in the next 20 years. And the mix sub-area plans, next step. So we will be releasing a public review draft in early March. It will be a 30-day public comment period. Our goals have a mayor's proposed plan send to council by the end of May, and that the council will consider it sometime in the summer or the fall with the other regional center plans and other comprehensive plan that's going forward. Other implementation actions that are still hanging, our zoning work has been in place for a little over 2 years. So there's some lessons learned and how we apply it. And so we need to go back and make some tweaks. So we'll be doing that. We are starting this year, we'll be preparing a biannual report of development trends within the mix. So people can see what's happening, what isn't happening. And there'll be a bigger report every 4 years that is to talk about what are the barriers that we've seen to industrial development and industrial job growth in the mix. And finally, we do want to update the Streets Illustrated Manual at SDOT for our 2 new zones that we expect to have significantly more pedestrian activity, and to come up with a street profile that allows pedestrians and freight to move safely. And that's all I've got. Happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you. Michaela, you were early in the queue.
Yeah, I have two questions that are very different from one another. The first is that I followed the council decision to allow 990 so units in the SoDo area. You didn't talk about that at all, so just for the group's awareness, the Port of Seattle, and I don't totally understand how the Burlington Northern Railroad joined it, but they had a role in the appeal as well. They appealed the development code regulatory changes allowing that upzone to the Growth Manager Hearings Board, and the Growth Manager Hearings Board invalidated the development regulations and remanded them back to the city, and the city has until May to address it. So where does that fall in all of this, and how come we're not talking about it?
Well, I do actually. I just did it this time.
Okay.
We actually have a new policy in the Greater Duwamish plan. That new housing will not be allowed in the stadium district.
And in fact, the board invalidated the plan in part on the basis of the action being inconsistent with Seattle's zone comp plan. With the
Yeah,
GMA
so
and the county planning policies in 2015.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't, I'm not a lawyer. I don't agree with a lot of the things that are in that decision, and city attorney's office, and they're appealing.
Oh, that's the state of it.
What?
So the state is not that you're working on
The state remanded it back to the city.
yes.
And
The city's
city is preparing to appeal that ruling. So I guess the background, urban industrial zone is what we call it. And that is that trend, not in the stadium district, but everywhere else it applies. It's that transitional zone between industrial and non-industrial and the core industrial areas. And those are areas that we see as finer grained. They have more public facing uses. I think the brewery district is a good example. There's lots of tap rooms. You can imagine people who live nearby walking in, going to, go participate in that. And through our process, our long, lengthy process, there were people who said it might be useful to have some limited workforce housing in this zone. And so we developed an approach, very few areas where you could have it. It's a conditional use, and there's affordability requirements. There's have to be a certain distance from major truck streets. I can't remember all the conditions. And then that was in the EIS that we released in 2023. And then the deal was made to bring a large coalition of people to support the legislation to change industrial zoning. And there were trade-offs, and one of those was to keep a big part of the coalition together is that the housing provision of that zone would not apply in the stadium district. And so that is why that was done. It was covered in the EIS, and the EIS Hearings Board. I think they were wrong in how they interpreted the information in the EIS about whether or not the ordinance enacted fell within the bounds of it. I think it did, but there were other things that were in that decision. So that's a long story about it.
Okay. Yeah. It happened at the last minute. It was taken up by a committee that was not the select committee on the comprehensive plan.
And we weren't part of it.
Right. And so there's a corrective action that's underway in response to the way the process was run.
Yeah, that's all things to be worked out. All I know is the city attorney's office is preparing their appeal or challenge, I'm not sure what it's called, to the Growth Management Hearings Board about their decision. And it could result in for the ordinance to become effective, we might have to take some actions. I don't, it just depends on how they ultimately rule.
Okay, but meanwhile, you're moving forward with these plans because the stadium district doesn't apply in these plans. I guess I'm.
No, the stadium district is within these. We might be at odds, and we would bring that forward if, well, we should know by the time council gets these plans, first of all, so if we have to change the plan, it can be changed. But let's say the ruling stands, they rule it down. We are putting in a policy, and furthermore, there will be no housing in the stadium district.
So it isn't a goal to figure out how to make the F zone work.
It is
for the
not.
reasons work.
It is not.
Okay.
And I would just note, for situational awareness of everyone, that the legislation that you're talking about, Michaela, was brought forward by a council member who's no longer on the council.
Yes.
And so it's unclear to me from where I sit if there is a champion for that work.
Yeah.
So, and we will continue to track it.
And I think, yeah, as a commission in the past, we do have new members now, so I think we would go through a different, conversation, but we were very supportive of the legislation as it advanced, as it was sort of, what came out of the maritime industrial strategy. There was a lot of needles to thread in that process, and it was done well. And it was ready for, implementation as it was designed. And so it was just really disappointing to me to see sort of kind of a power play at the end that was really kind of disrespectful of the many years of work by a lot of stakeholders to come to consensus on a proposal. And it, doesn't align with some of the goals I saw today around, avoiding and, environmental justice issues and environmental justice for folks. So people who live in Seattle have the right to live in a place that's not going to shorten their lifespan. And that is why you're working so closely with Georgetown and South Park, because those communities already exist down there. But the second you create new communities with residents, you have an obligation to make sure that those are complete communities for those people. And I don't think that's our vision for the stadium district, right? And the council member at the time, Sarah Nelson, was, touting it as a way to meet our affordable housing need. And that just simply, from an equity perspective, is wildly inappropriate for a city of our size and sophistication. My other is just more of a opportunity, maybe, is that the downtown suburban plan made an intentional focus to have kind of an indigenous element that was woven throughout the different components of the downtown plan. I think it was a little surface, and then I think it was just sort of branding downtown as like a place that has meant something to different people over many generations and centuries. But the mix have a lot of waterfront. Waterfront property has a lot of meaning to the Duwamish and other tribes, because that is where a lot of their camps were and eat and live. And so I think it's like an opportunity to also have sort of that articulation of what does it mean to have for these industrial lands to exist over the next 20 years in a way that also sort of.
We do.
Okay.
In the narrative, we talk about the history and how these lands have been an important place for indigenous communities long before we were all here.
Do you have policies though that also uplift
We don't
that?
have policies specifically related to that. Yeah,
Have you been,
I'd be interested in hearing, if you want.
are the tribes at all involved in them?
In the natural, we do much more robust engagement with tribes now than we were doing just even a few years ago. We did make significant efforts to get input into this. And And we received comments on the EIS, but we did not get much input on the actual implementations actions after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something to maybe revisit, and then.
I'm the last person in the queue, and I'll try and make this quick. I wasn't involved in the commission during the kind of previous engagement, but I'm a frequent pedestrian in our industrial lands, not only as a like transportation to and from certain places, but I also regularly work with youth in job training programs that engage with and participate in the industrial work that's happening in our industrial lands. And I'm really excited to think about a street profile that considers pedestrian and freight movement safely throughout or in particular parts of the district. And I just think that considering the whole of our industrial lands as safe pedestrian and freight corridors is really important to me, because I think that part of complete industrial communities, complete economic communities in these areas involves allowing people to move through them without necessarily being dependent on a car in such a way that allows freight to move safely and pedestrians to move safely.
One of the finer points of the 2023 legislation was that we dramatically upped the street improvements required for industrial development to require sidewalks and street trees and things that weren't required in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's really exciting. And I also want to mention that there are many folks who are experiencing homelessness who reside in our industrial lands. And I think a safer pedestrian environment is tied to a safer environment for sort of all residents of the city, including those that are residing there in a sort of housing of last resort condition. So yeah, really appreciate that. Thanks.
If I could just add one quick thing, just want to really thank Jim for coming to us before the plan has been officially released. And that, you know, to your point earlier, Michaela, when the Planning Commission sees things that are baked and off to council, it reduces the opportunity for the Planning Commission to be collaborative and work with staff in developing the draft that then goes public. So I really appreciate you being willing to come.
Me too.
Looking forward to providing comment. Thank you. In the last bit of our meeting, we will move on to commission business, and I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa for a recap of our final comments on the draft downtown sub-area plan, among other things.
Great. For members of the public still tuned in, after we talk about a recap of our final comments on the draft downtown sub-area plan that will be submitted tomorrow, I will read into the record the public comment. I will take 2 minutes on each of the comments that I received. Some may not be able to be read thoroughly in its entirety in the 2 minutes allotted. I will just want to assure everybody that all public comments will be included in our minutes once they are approved at the next Planning Commission meeting, which I believe is the, math in my head, 12, 14, 26. And then those get posted to our website. So, but before we get to the public comment, I'm going to turn it over to Olivia in a moment. We were first briefed on the draft downtown sub-area plan at our January 8th meeting. We spoke about it at the next Planning Commission meeting after that, which can't do the math in the head, 24th, 22nd. And we did take the Housing and Neighborhoods Committee meeting earlier this month to finalize those comments. We didn't have the amount, and then along the way, we found out that the public comment period had been extended a little bit from the 30 days to February 15th, which is Sunday. So we are not going to be formalizing our comments in a letter, which is our usual practice, but rather I will be emailing OPCD staff and copying Mayor's office staff and Councilmember Lynn's office the comments that I sent to you, we sent to you all yesterday afternoon. And they will be phrased as excerpts of meeting minutes, organized by topic. So they're not bouncing around too much. So we unfortunately do not have the opportunity for additional discussion. We've taken 3 meetings to talk about our comments. Olivia is going to go over them at a very high level, and we will be submitting those, as I said, tomorrow to city staff and elected officials.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. So I believe Vanessa sent the kind of final draft version of these out to you last night, barring a couple of typos that we found this morning, because it's the last one. So I will correct the typos. It's not the final, but otherwise we won't be adding or changing anything. So I'm just going to go over, like Vanessa said, really high level, but if you want to know the details of what is being submitted, read the draft that Vanessa sent to you. And I imagine commission members will probably be CC'd on what gets sent as well, so you can see what actually goes out to officials. So the document is really just a summary of comments. The summary begins with really high level overarching general comments about the plan. So we start off with a few positive comments, such as the plan's inclusion of people with disabilities and the policies in the plan aim to increase housing for seniors, families, and children. And then we move into a series of comments that largely center around this concept that the group discussed at the last couple of meetings about the need to acknowledge the challenges that downtown is facing currently, and the need to incorporate phases into the plan that indicate how some actions will have to occur before other aspects of the plan vision can really be put in place. So those comments from our last discussion got incorporated into that general comment section. And then the summary goes theme by theme to cover high-level comments and policy-specific comments. Again, not going to go into all of those, especially not the policy-specific ones, but included on some of the high-level by theme, we have under the downtown is home theme, comments noting the need for a gap analysis on access to daily needs and amenities for people of all ages downtown. There's comments that note the need to plan for providing access to schools for children downtown. And ensuring downtown housing addresses the full spectrum of housing needs for all income levels. There's comments under the Make Downtown Safe, welcoming theme that include improving vibrant decking between transit nodes, as well as naming key areas of concern for pedestrian safety, such as along 3rd Ave, near 12th Jackson Street, and note the need to sort of call out those problem areas specifically in the plan. And then the comments in that section also celebrate the inclusion of policies to repurpose and overlay for first. So that's one of the appreciative comments that was included. Under the make use of every square foot theme, there's several comments related to recommendations to focus on the long-term sustainability of culture and creative industries in downtown, specifically such as providing incentives for the creation and preservation of maker spaces in order to make that a more sustainable place for artists to stay long term. And there's also comments that suggest positioning downtown as the test bed for regional economic transitions. So really kind of calling attention to the use of pilots in downtown to solve some of the current issues. Under the Steward, Our Home for the Next 7 Generations theme, there's comments including consideration for downtown as a place to implement the low pollution neighborhood concept. As well as the need to ensure financial impact studies done for any new environmental and emission regulations that could balance increased construction costs with appropriate incentives, so there's not additional barriers to development downtown. And then finally, under the Find Our Way theme, there's comments that include an appreciation for policies that make more room for people to use streets over cars. So again, that repurposing the right of way type concept. And there's also some comments that recommend studying how existing transit service supports access to daily needs like grocery stores and schools, as well as supportive services for people living downtown. And there are comments that touch on the need to study high food delivery activity areas and to improve hill climb wayfinding downtown. So again, just a high flyover just to give you a sample of what was included in each section. There is more in there, especially when you get to the policy specific comments. So really, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to review the draft plan. A lot of you did that sort of on your own time because we had a condensed time frame. And so thanks for taking the time to share your comments either in one of our meetings or by sending it to staff. And I think we managed to pull together a pretty substantial set of comments in a short turnaround. So thank you all.
Any
Thanks.
questions?
Thanks, staff.
And just to note, I will either blind copy you all or probably just forward you the email I send. So your emails aren't out there in the public record. Okay. I'm going to move us on to our final public comments. And got my water here. Again, I'm going to read the comments for 2 minutes. I've got 7 public comments, and I will start momentarily. Get my phone on. Okay. Dear Planning Commission, in City Council's review of the Draft 1 Seattle Plan Comp Plan update last year, they adopted an amendment to address the overconcentration of homeless shelters and human service facilities downtown, including the CID and Pioneer Square new policy CF 5.5. I both stand with and have worked with Gary Lee and the CID on many overconcentration issues in both of our neighborhoods, Pioneer Square and the CID. While Pioneer Square supports the city's need to address the housing crisis, these historic neighborhoods are currently carrying a disproportionate share of the city's low-income housing and service-intense units. I call for geographic equity. Our neighborhoods host a significantly higher percentage of social housing compared to most other Seattle districts. This overconcentration creates an imbalance. This imbalance strains local resources. Our infrastructure and public services are stretched very thin. This impacts the quality of life for all residents. Overconcentration threatens our neighborhood's cultural vitality. Small businesses and cultural institutions in Pioneer Square CID, already struggling to recover from economic shifts, face unique challenges when the residential mix lacks diversity. Overconcentration impairs long-term recovery. For our neighborhoods to thrive, we require a mix of residential, commercial, workforce, and market rate housing. We need to adopt a fair share housing policy. Rather than adding more density to areas already at capacity, the city should prioritize new social housing in neighborhoods that have historically seen very little of this development. This would ensure every community contributes to the city's growth while allowing Pioneer Square and the CID breathing room for healthy and sustainable recoveries. Perhaps a formal cumulative impact study of low-income housing in the 98104 zip code could happen before further projects are approved or expansion of current social housing is allowed. Pioneer Square and the CID deserve a future defined by balance, not burden. Thank you. All right. And read this, and that comment was provided by Tia Petrovich, who is the chair of the Pioneer Square Residents Council. I'm next going to read a comment by Scott Roberts. Dear co-chairs Alvarez and Hutchins, Executive Director Murdoch, and members of the Seattle Planning Commission. I'm writing as a resident of the Morgan Junction in West Seattle to provide formal public testimony regarding the centers and corridors legislation currently before the City Council. I request that this statement be entered into the public record for the One Seattle Plan. Specifically, I'm asking the committee to maintain the neighborhood residential zoning on 39th Avenue Southwest within the Morgan Junction Neighborhood Center. The proposed low-rise 2 zoning designation is inappropriate for this street. My wife and I have proudly called this neighborhood home for 26 years. We raised our children here, volunteered in local public schools, and coached youth sports. Our daughter now teaches at Lafayette Elementary, and our son hopes to return after finishing his studies at Washington State University. We are deeply invested in this community and want to see it grow in a way that strengthens what makes it special. I support adding housing and fostering growth in a vibrant, walkable Morgan Junction. However, LR2 on this particular block is a planning mismatch that undermines the goals of the One Seattle Plan rather than advancing them. 39th Avenue Southwest is not a transit corridor, a commercial street, or a redevelopment spine. It is a narrow, tree-lined residential street outside the Morgan Junction core with limited parking and a noticeable slope that makes full LR2 build-out difficult. This is not where mid-scale zoning belongs. LR2 here does not meaningfully advance affordability. The first buildings torn down under LR2 are the older, naturally affordable homes and small multifamily buildings that provide the neighborhood's lowest cost housing. They are replaced with expensive new construction out of reach for most working families. We gain theoretical capacity on paper, but we lose real affordability on the ground. That comment was from Scott Roberts. I will note that planning commissioners have received these public comments in their entirety, and as I noted before, they will also be included in our minutes once approved, and I'm reading the public comments in order of having received them. So the next public comment is from Betty Lau. Dear Vanessa Murdoch and Planning Commission members, my comments on the plan must include fair share policy so that no one neighborhood is overburdened with shelters and services for clients such as Pioneer Square and Chinatown International District. The CID is surrounded by 20+ shelters, and only recently the city ended its navigation center in Little Saigon. Pioneer Square serves 800-day clients in work release, human services, and temporary shelter, open human service centers in the new regional centers. 2, restrict or eliminate non-conforming businesses in favor of more retail. 3, historic South Downtown has surveyed the CID and found 200,000 square feet of unused space that could be converted to low-income senior housing, for which there is a wait list of non-English speakers. 4, URMs include an amendment to provide assistance for the many historic buildings in the CID and Pioneer Square. 5, planners must be cognizant of cultural sensitivities and characteristics of Pioneer Square and the CID. Plans must reflect the cultures of these 2 historic districts. Thank you, Betty. The next comment is from Masako W. Wada, and it is in regard to the One Seattle plan opposing LR2 zoning on 39th Avenue Southwest. I'm writing as a resident of the Morgan Junction in West Seattle to provide formal public testimony regarding the centers and corridors legislation currently before the City Council. I request that the statement be entered into the public record for the One Seattle plan. We purchased our home specifically with the understanding that we live on a residential street, not a high-density commercial building area impacting the daylight and views, and we love our slower pace of the residential streets to enjoy sunset walks and sunshine in the neighborhood and our homes. We were surprised to find that the potential impact of zoning changes allowing a 4-story wall extending from Southwest Holly Street to Southwest Juneau Street, which would effectively block all views west of 35th, affecting 16 city blocks. This will have a huge impact on our daily life, and quality of our neighborhood day-to-day life will be significantly compromised. This will potentially create an unattractive valley zone, which includes my house on 39th Avenue, with compromised sun exposure, critical value for houses living in Seattle between these newly zoned 4 to 6 story streets. We understand the change on California Avenue and Fauntleroy Way, as those are already high density zones. However, extending out the higher buildings zones to the other residential streets is so unfair for all the current residents. Please reconsider, and please do not allow higher building structure in our peaceful neighborhood street. Please keep our West Seattle charm intact. All right, the next comment I will read is from John Germain and is also public comment opposing rezoning Morgan Junction. To the co-chairs Alvarez and Hutchins, Executive Director Murdoch, and members of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'm writing as a concerned resident of the Morgan Junction neighborhood in West Seattle to formally express my opposition to the proposed centers and corridors legislation. While the plan aims to address housing affordability, I believe it does so at an unacceptable personal cost to existing homeowners and the long-term stability of our neighborhoods. My opposition is based on the final critical concerns. Threats to homeowners' stability and well-being. Many of us have invested our life savings and decades of care into our homes. The significant upzoning of residential areas, which comprise about 2/3 of Seattle, threatens to drive up property values and taxes, creating immense financial pressure that could displace long-term fixed income residents. Loss of privacy and quality of life. The proposed changes to development standards, such as increasing height zones for stacked flats to 42 feet in LR1 zones and removing upper level setbacks in mid-rise zones, will allow massive 5 to 6 story structures to loom directly over existing homes. This results in a direct and invasive loss of sunlight, territorial views, and personal privacy. Impractical transportation and parking expectations. The push to move residents toward walking, biking, and rolling does not reflect the daily realities of families who require vehicles for school, medical appointments, and essential errands. Removing parking requirements without adequate alternatives compromises the ability of residents to manage their lives effectively. Strained community infrastructure. Rapidly increasing density along frequent transit corridors ignores local topography and places an unsustainable burden on our aging utility services and residential street capacity. Okay. Take some water. The sixth public comment is from Joan Miley and is in regarding to opposition to the LR2 zoning on 39th Avenue Southwest. Dear co-chairs Alvarez and Hutchins, Executive Director Murdoch, and members of the Seattle Planning Commission, I'm writing as a resident of the Morgan Junction in West Seattle to provide formal public testimony regarding the Centers and Corridors legislation currently before the City Council. I request that this statement be entered into the public record for the One Seattle Plan. Every day as I walk from my house on 39th Street towards Holly Street, I breathe in the wonders of the myriad of architecturally different homes, the trees, the gardens, the water views, the Olympics. My soul gets replenished here. LR2 housing on 39th Street would kill my soul and the soul and character of West Seattle. 39th Street is a narrow residential street with barely enough parking for those of us who live here. The character and charm of a quiet residential street that so many of us bought into to raise our children will cease to exist. The question is, who will pay the price in dollars? Who will stand to gain in dollars? Who will stand to lose? The reality is, middle income will stand to lose. Middle income will pay the price in dollars. The winner is obvious. And then our last public comment is from Sean McCready. He is also commenting opposing the LR2 zoning on 39th Avenue Southwest. To Chair Lynn and the Select Committee on the Comprehensive Plan, I am writing as a resident of 39th Avenue Southwest to provide formal public testimony regarding the Centers and Corridors legislation currently before the City Council. I request that this statement be entered into the public record for the One Seattle Plan. My family has lived on 39th Avenue Southwest for 16 years. I grew up in Seattle, and my partner Erin and I have built our life here, investing everything we have in our neighborhood and the great Seattle community. As Erin said in the letters she sent to our City Council members, we love the city, and we're asking the city to love us back. This rezoning proposal isn't about affordable housing. It's business interests trying to steamroll the middle class once again. We know what's driving this proposal because we were receiving so many unwanted phone calls from developers trying to buy our home because of exciting new zoning opportunities that we took out our phone line. And while folks who never seen our street might imagine something different, it's a middle-class neighborhood of mostly modest homes. When residents of our street have invested in their homes, they haven't torn down and started over or taken their homes down to the studs. They've made thoughtful, sustainable choices that consider their neighbors and the environment. Allowing 4-story buildings on this street won't result in affordable housing. It will result in the most affordable homes to buy or rent on the street being torn down and replaced with new unaffordable construction because developers want to build condos and townhomes with views, and they don't care if they need to move far from the main arterials and cores to do it. They don't care if they cast a shadow over an entire neighborhood to do it. Many people on this street have lived here for decades, never anticipating that the zoning would be changed so drastically. The changes that House Bill 1110 will bring are already major. There is absolutely no reason to expand the zoning even further except for greed. And that concludes that. I'm just double checking. I believe that concludes the public comments that I received via email. And again, all commissioners have these copies of these in their email inboxes. And just a note, I've encouraged and will continue to encourage members of the public writing in to the Planning Commission to also provide their comments to the appropriate authority, which would be either City Council, the mayor, and or city staff. With that, I will turn it back to the chair.
All right. I think that we just need to adjourn. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks to all the members of the public listening in.
Thank you.
Thank you.